live streamed, and then when you're actually ready to record, we do
Well,
have
you might
clocks.
get seven. I get 6:58 now. You can turn it on, Dan, if you want.
Oh,
I get
okay, I'll start
6:59 now.
Yeah, all right, I'll start recording. Why not?
Yeah, it doesn't, that way. Okay,
All
so
right, so you all heard that. We're recording. We're live. Hey, Stuart.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. You?
Very good.
All right.
Lord, welcome.
Is that Justin's voice? I thought,
It
oh,
is.
there's Justin. Hi, Justin. I recognize your voice.
Yeah.
You know, I always say if I close my eyes and people talk to me from all across the state, I'd recognize their voices. But if I passed them in the supermarket, I wouldn't know
Of
who they
course.
unless they talked.
I think you and I have corresponded on email when I was in Framingham at some point, but I don't know that we got very far. So I don't think we ever actually met in person.
Nice to meet you, Erica. Very excited about Framingham joining CPA.
I am too. I was told when I got there it was a no-go and it was never going to happen. And then they just got all the right people in the room and it
Right.
worked. So, you
Well,
know,
the
I said
problem
to
was
them, you build your coalition, it'll happen. And they did. They looked at Waltham and said, we got to do what Waltham's doing.
Right. They didn't like it as a town, but when they became a city, they said, okay, now we got to do what Waltham does.
Full disclosure, I have recently left Framingham. I'm now the director of planning community development for Bill Ricca. So
Oh, okay. We have to talk, Erica.
Okay, that's fine. I had an interesting CPC meeting with them tonight as well, so we can talk off. We'll coordinate it during working hours. How's that?
We definitely have to
All
talk.
right. Bill is mute. Bill is on. It's 7 o'clock now. I'll wait another minute or two and then I'll call the meeting to order. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Erica.
No, we were done.
Fine. I realize we're live
Okay.
streaming. I probably shouldn't, be too business,
Sure you
day job
should.
oriented right now.
Tom won't be here.
Tom Prianti won't.
No,
Have
he's
you
not
heard from-
joining.
Have you heard from Bobby LeBlanc or Sean or
I
Loretta?
just saw an email from Bob. He said he's having trouble with his email, so I just sent him the agenda and I asked him if he needed help with the Zoom, and I haven't heard yet.
Well, if Kathy's there, he'll get on. If she's not, he's not.
Okay.
Oh, wait, and I see somebody as an attendee, maybe phone number. Let's see.
He's 617-908.
No, how about, who's 4755?
Ask them to put in the
That may be
chat.
Sean.
Okay, yes, a good idea, chat. Let me add the chat. That's probably Sean.
I think.
Okay.
Bill, how are you?
Good. How's everyone?
Excellent, thanks.
It's good.
Soccer season started, so I'm good. Hockey's finally ended. Soccer starting.
Are boards in Waltham starting to meet in person again slowly?
Slowly.
Laura.
Yeah, the council is. And the Board of Survey and Planning will, for their May meeting, will meet in person. And we're gonna decide tonight whether we meet in person for our May meeting. Okay, it's 7:02. I will call the meeting to order. With that, first on the agenda, Dan, if you would, the roll, please.
I will. Let me just first bring in Sean here. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Let's see. I'll go above Sean. Let's go with Amanda. Are you here?
Present.
All right. Loretta? Not here. Bob LeBlanc is currently absent. Bill Doyle?
Present.
All right. Tom, we know, is absent. I'm here. Erica?
Present.
And Justin?
Present.
Okay. And then Sean, can you hear us?
He's muted to start off.
Yeah. Well,
On the, Sean, you're muted. I don't know whether you can hear us, but
There he is.
okay, he's unmuted. You're
here?
on, right, Sean?
Yeah, I'm here. I couldn't hear what to hit. You guys kept talking over the person that told me what to hit.
But
All right, well, you're here. Okay, I'm
Okay,
marking you
good.
present. Okay. Well, that's great. We have actually quorum with 6,
okay,
3
so,
currently absent. So we're good on quorum.
okay, the second on the agenda are the minutes of the meeting of March 15th. Julie sent them out. Did everybody have a chance to read them?
Yep.
Yes.
Do I hear a motion
So moved
as presented, Erica?
as presented. I had no changes.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second,
All right.
All in favor?
aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. The minutes are accepted as presented. Okay, new business. There are no applications. There is no public hearings or regular meetings. So we have our guest tonight, Stuart Saginaw, who is the executive director of the CPA Coalition. And I'm going to turn it over to Stuart, and he's going to enlighten all of us. Stuart, welcome.
Glad to be here, and thanks for having me. Dan and Justin, I'm going to share my screen if that's okay, because I have a
Yep. Go for it.
presentation. And tell me about before we start, let me ask 2 questions. Tell me about your timeline. What are the things you have to do tonight, and how much time do we have for a discussion here with this? Because I want to be respectful of your time.
Well, right now, we have a couple of things to discuss after, but they're minor. But Bob LeBlanc just got on, Dan. I
Oh,
saw his
okay.
number up there, 9120.
Okay, he's in already. Okay.
Okay, so how long is your presentation, Stuart? Now,
Well, that leads to the second part. So I like to do it interactively, Justin, if it's okay with you.
I would prefer that, to be honest with you, Stuart.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So the actual presentation is not that long. Of course, it depends upon how much discussion we have and how much
Okay,
questions and that sort of thing folks have. So again, thanks for having me. I'm Stuart Saginaw, as Justin said, from the Community Preservation Coalition. And for those of you that don't know us, we're a nonprofit based in Boston, and our sole purpose is to support you in your role as Community Preservation Committee members and the municipal officials in the 188 communities that have CPA. We have a steering committee of 21 members, including all these organizations that are represented on our steering committee. We have some at-large folks, and we also have 8 people that are on local community preservation committees, just like you. And as a matter of fact, we have a couple of vacancies coming up. The nominating committee met last week to talk about doing some outreach. So you're going to see in the next month or so some outreach from us, looking for a couple new members of the steering committee of the coalition, and we'd invite you all to consider doing that. We're a fun bunch, and we only meet quarterly, and right now we're meeting by Zoom too, so not a lot of heavy lifting. I do want to also point out our website to all of you, communitypreservation.org. It's really a fabulous resource. I don't think we've ever taken anything off this website in 20 years, so there's a ton of information on there. And I'll particularly point to this red circle here, the technical assistance tab. When you go to our website, you open this tab, there are literally hundreds of articles on anything to do with CPA. So if there's something you're wondering about, or a new application that came in that you're trying to figure out what to do with, this is a great place to head for some basic information as you're debating what to do with your applications. This is an exciting month for CPA because it is election season, and we did have an election on a week ago yesterday in Lakeville. They became the 188th CPA community. We're well over half the municipalities in the state that have CPA. And because we have a lot of cities, over 65% of Massachusetts residents live in a CPA community. I love this last stat that no one has ever revoked CPA. I hope I can say that for a long time, who knows? But every community that has ever had the program has found it so useful and so helpful to their quality of life that no one has ever revoked it. It's only even been on the ballot to revoke 3 times, and it failed miserably. So there's the CPA map, just to put yourselves in some perspective. when you guys adopted CPA, this map was very white. And now it's got a lot of green, which are the towns that have CPA, and it's got a lot of orange, which are the cities that have CPA. And then the 4 stars are the other communities that have CPA on the ballot. This year, we've got 2 more this month. Pepperell and Westminster are voting at the end of the month, and then Westboro and Worcester are voting in the spring for CPA. So the Worcester City Council put it on the ballot last week also. And any way you look at CPA, whether it's the number of communities on that map or the project statistics, which I have here for you, it's been a huge success. And I love to toss out the fact that it has raised $2.65 billion, and it hasn't even been around for more than 20 years. So that's incredible in terms of the quality of life. You know, the things that you've done with it in Waltham, multiply that times 188, and then 14,000 projects. And it really is a terrific quality of life program for communities. All right. I wanted to also bring you up to date on the CPA Trust Fund. Anytime I do a presentation, I talk about the trust fund because this matching money that you get from the state is really the engine behind CPA. Let's be honest. I don't know if Waltham or any of the other communities would have adopted CPA if there hadn't been this state matching component. You can always raise your own taxes to do projects, right? But if you're getting a 30-40% discount on every project you do because you're getting this matching money from the state, now suddenly you've got a terrific program. So the money from the trust fund is distributed every November, and it primarily comes from a non-budgetary revenue source. So it's not subject to appropriation by the legislature. We don't have to go up there every year and fight for it like every other constituent does. It's an automatic funding. There are fees that are tacked on to every document filed at the Registry of Deeds. And those fees are forwarded to the Department of Revenue. They're deposited in the CPA Trust Fund. And the only thing that can happen with that money is that it's paid out to you and the other communities every November 15th as a match. Unfortunately, those fees did not keep up with the growth of the program, and they were not adjusted for close to 18 years. And you saw what happened to your match. It got very, very low. It was just about to dip into the single digits. But we had worked for a decade on Beacon Hill to get them comfortable with raising those fees. And they finally did in 2019. So the documents that are filed at the registry are now surcharged at $50, and municipal lien certificates are $25. We also advocate every year at the State House for additional funding from the state budget. They often have a surplus, and 7 out of the last 9 years, we've gotten money from the state budget surplus for the trust fund. It adds up to $86.5 million over the past 7 years, which is terrific. And there was $10 million that we were able to get for last year. So it bumped your match from the high 30s to 43.8% last year. As a matter of fact, the House budget comes out tomorrow. And we've been working on it all this year. And if it doesn't contain this additional 10 million, we have an amendment already lined up to be filed to the House budget. So we'll be pretty busy tomorrow getting that together. When we say you got a 43.8% match, what we mean is 43.8% of what you raise locally. Everyone gets the same percentage on the first round. So if you have $1 million surcharge, you're going to get a check. Last year, you got a check for $438,000 from the trust fund. Your surcharge is actually higher than $1 million. DOR just came out with their projection for this coming November yesterday. Hopefully you saw our newsletter. And if you're not getting our newsletter, let us know. We'll make sure to update our records. But we did send a newsletter out yesterday letting know that DOR is projecting a 35% match this year. I don't have the best news about the trust fund. If you had read that newsletter closely, you would have seen us talk about the fact that 43.8% is probably a high watermark for this cycle. The activity at the registry is slowing down dramatically. As interest rates go up, fewer people are refinancing. Each one of those refinancing documents is a $50 fee for CPA. And the real estate market, there's just no inventory on the market. So There's not a lot of homes being sold because there's not a lot of inventory. And so I think we're in for, a decline this year from 43.8 to somewhere in the 35 range as DOR is projecting. Unless we can get some surplus money, which we're working very hard to do that would help. And I think what we'll do is, as the match declines naturally from the registry fees, we'll ask next year for a higher amount from the surplus. We did get 20 million 2 years ago, and the first time we got 25 million. So we'll start advocating next year, I think, when we can show a declining environment for more money. It's been tough for us to advocate for that now because the match has gone up 5 straight years. It's really been a terrific time to be in CPA, but I think this past November was the high watermark. Just to give you an idea of what that fee increase did, on the left-hand side, that's the last full year of collections at the Registry of Deeds under the old fee structure. And you can see the trust fund brought in 23.2 million. We just completed the first full year of collections at the new higher $50 surcharge, and it brought in $82.5 million. So you can see what that fee increase did. It was huge. And you can also see why it took us a decade to convince the legislature to do it. We're talking about a lot of money, and it's difficult to get 200 legislators and a governor all moving in the right direction on, what is it, $50 million or so. But that takes a long time. And, that's one of our main roles that we feel really proud about representing you up at the legislature. All right. So Julie and I spoke beforehand, and she told me some of the projects that you guys are working on and some of the issues you're having on debates on projects and past projects. So the back half of my presentation here is to talk a little bit about what we call allowable uses of CPA funding. Hopefully all of you are familiar with this chart. This is the single most important slide in my presentation, the single most important piece of paper in the CPA universe, the CPA allowable uses chart. And this is a simplified version. The official version from the Department of Revenue is on our website. And it really helps to look at this chart to figure out, it should be the first place you look when someone asks you, when they see you in the supermarket, if you recognize them, and they say, hey, Dan, can we use CPA money to fix up the playground at the park down the street for me? This is the chart you look at to answer those type of questions. This is codified in CPA in section 5B2, but it's a long legalese paragraph that, we all read when CPA was passed in 2000. No one understood what you could use the money for. And then when DOR did this chart and put it into, pictures worth 1,000 words, suddenly it made a lot of sense to folks what that long paragraph means. We all know, obviously, the 4 categories of CPA: open space, meaning conservation land; historic, active recreation, which is outdoor parks, playgrounds, and athletic fields; and community housing. But what's not obvious, unless you read the legalese in 5B2, is that not every project in those categories is eligible. Far from it. The project has to also be justified by one of the verbs you see on the left-hand side. So not every historic project is eligible for funding. Let's give an example in the historic category. Let's say you get an application to rehabilitate a historic building. City Hall, as a matter of fact, is a beautiful historic building. Maybe that's going to need some work, and you get an application. You want to know whether that's eligible for funding. I have a more detailed historic flow chart, which we'll get into historic chart in a little more depth, that one category. But basically, you have 3 verbs available to you, right? Acquire, preserve, and rehabilitate. Well, are you acquiring City Hall with CPA funds? No, you already own it. Are you preserving it, protecting it from injury, harm, or destruction? Well, if you're doing rehabilitation work, probably not. It's probably fixing up City Hall is probably a rehabilitation project. And you can see there's a big yes in that box. You can rehabilitate City Hall with CPA funds. But let's say you get a historic application the next day, and it's from the Historical Society, and they want money to do an oral history video of World War II veterans in Waltham. Not a lot of World War II veterans left. We want to capture their stories and use a professional production company and do a video that's going to play on the cable channel and at the library, all about our World War II veterans in Waltham. Well, let's go to the chart. Are you acquiring a historic resource? And the definition of a historic resource is a building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact. Has to be one of those 6 things. So are you acquiring a building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact when you're doing this oral history presentation? Are you preserving a building, structure, vessel, real property? And are you rehabilitating one? You are not. Unless you can find a box on this chart that says yes, it is not eligible for funding. So that oral history project is not eligible. In fact, what you're really doing there is creating something new, right? You're creating a new video. And you can see clearly in the historic category, it says no, you can't create something new in the historic category. I kid the legislature all the time when I show them this chart. I said, hey, you guys got that right. You put a no in the historic box. You can't create anything new. And that project could also be considered a support project. It supports historic preservation. It's a great project, but unfortunately, CPA does have to have 4 corners, and it can't fund every single project in each of these categories. Any questions on the allowable uses chart or things that have stood out on been question marks for you when you looked at this chart?
Yeah.
Ken's got a question.
Also, yeah, but I keep having to go back. The preserve or rehabilitate seems to be it's like, seems very close in terminology, but I know there's a legal distinction, and you kind of mentioned it there, but if you could just hammer
Sure.
that one more time for me.
Preserve is usually protecting one of those 6 assets from future injury, harm, or destruction. Rehabilitation is fixing past injury, harm, or destruction. So it's really preventative versus rehabilitation.
Okay.
So, and there are definitions. The definition for preserve is very short. It's, protecting the asset from injury, harm, or destruction. So it's really a future thing you're doing. It can't be made.
If I can't, a roof, Dan, is preservation.
Correct. You have to be careful on preservation, because preservation often dips into maintenance, right?
Right.
Changing the filter, on the HVAC system is preventing the boiler from blowing up. But that's maintenance. So maintenance is never allowed with CPA money. So preserve is the trickiest verb. It's a tough one. And there are some categories, like the open space category, where there's virtually no projects that happen in that category under the definition of preserve. Maybe removing invasive species from a piece of open space. But, in general, in the open space category, which is conservation land, you don't do anything. You let it sit. That's what conservation land's all about. So does that help on the difference between the definition, Dan, of preserve and rehabilitate?
Yeah, no, that's great.
If you're doing anything with ADA accessibility in a historic building, that's rehabilitation. If you're fixing the exterior, rehabbing the windows, those are all rehabilitation activities.
I think Erica had a question too.
Yeah, I was curious about if you can give us some examples of the support category. That one's a little vague to me.
Yeah, and that's when I asked for, does anyone have any things on this chart, that they've never really been clear about or have been fuzzy? That's the question that always comes up, is like, well, what's up with support, right? So, and especially what's up with support that it says no in virtually every category, except for housing. The legislature knew when they created CPA, housing was going to be the toughest category. And that has been true in Waltham for sure. And most CPA communities, frankly. Housing is tough. It's expensive. It takes forever. You could spend millions before you even put a shovel in the ground. It's politically charged. It's difficult to locate, to site. It's a hard category. And that's why we have such a housing shortage in Massachusetts. So the legislature knew that. They wanted to give that category as many tools as possible for CPA communities to get at their housing issues. So basically, if something is in support of creating some affordable housing, it's okay. So you want to test a site for contamination to see if you could possibly build affordable housing there. That's a support activity to create housing. You want to do a housing production plan and hire an outside consultant to help advise you. You want to hire a consultant to review your housing applications and give you advice on them, or review the pro formas, or answer legal questions on an application you have in front of you. Those are all support activities. Rental assistance. That's the box that justifies rental assistance. You're not acquiring housing or creating housing or preserving housing, but it is a support activity to the affordable housing category. The legislature was very careful not to open up the other categories to support, because frankly, communities, when they see they see money available, they'll figure out, something to support that category and go for it. So is there, sometimes is the legislature, working with municipalities, or are they trying to, keep municipalities from doing certain things? It's a fine line, but in this case, I think they were very worried about municipalities using CPA funds if that category was sort of wide open under support.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Moving over your entire Parks and Recs budget, for example, to CPA, because all those activities support CPA. So that's something that will never change. And I think it was very smart of them just to limit it to the housing category.
Thank you.
By the way, Dan, I can't see everybody in this short version that I have on my screen. So if someone has a question who's not, it'd be good for you to let me know.
You got it.
All right. So let's move on in case no other questions on this particular thing. So the historic category is the one that has the most steps to qualifying a project. So housing is the hardest category to get stuff done. Historic is the one that has the most limits on it. And so there's a definition of a historic resource, like we talked about: building, structure, vessel, real property, document, artifact. But even if you have one of those things, that's still not good enough. I mean, people can call anything historic, right? So the legislature wanted to be careful. We want things to be truly historic, truly iconic. So if it's one of those 6 things, it also has to be on the state register of historic places, or a vote has to be taken by your local historic commission to deem it significant in the history, archaeology, architecture, or culture of Waltham. And hopefully that's happening in your community. I know some communities sort of miss this step, but there is a role for the historic commission in CPA. And if someone comes to you with an application spending money in the historic category, and whatever they have to spend money on is not on the state register of historic places, the brakes go on, and you have to send that applicant to the historic commission, and they get on the agenda for the historic commission. They present their case, and then the historic commission has to vote and send you a note saying, at the meeting of May 2nd, we deemed City Hall to be significant in the history of Waltham. And we would recommend you do that for even things that are obvious, because at least you're following protocol, and no one can blame you for, cutting corners, because there will be times, when communities will get applications for things that are old, but they're not necessarily historic. They're not significant. Being on the state register of historic places, that's for truly iconic things. And the alternate procedure where the historic commission votes is not meant to be a lower threshold. It's, just some things aren't on the register. Documents are not on the register, for example. So there's another procedure to go to the historic commission, but it's not meant to qualify things as historic that don't reach that, sort of level. And then, of course, we have the verbs, which we've talked about: acquisition, preservation, rehabilitation, and restoration. All right. So in looking at this historic category, this is, I know this does not look good on a slide, But it looks great on our website where we have it in a long vertical flow chart, but this is the only way we could get it on the slide. But there is a historic flow chart that kind of steps through all the steps I just described. Is it one of those 6 items? Is it on the historic register? Does one of those 3 verbs justify it? And you step through that, and then you arrive at the green, hopefully. And it's still not over in the historic category. You're still not out of the woods, because now you have to look at what is the work that's going to be done on that historic asset. And anything that's done on a historic asset has to meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. It really is only applying to buildings at that point and historic sites, real property. There is no standards for documents, for example. The state has some standards for documents, but not the Secretary of Interior standards. So we're really talking about buildings for the Secretary of Interior standards. And those are on our website as well. I didn't put them in here because we're sort of doing a shorter version of our presentation today. But if anyone has questions on the Secretary of Standards, I could answer them now, or you can refer to our website too. We have a ton of information on the standards. All right. So one of the projects that Julie was talking about was doing some digitization work and some other work to historic documents. And documents and artifacts were actually not part of the CPA legislation when it was passed in 2000. There have been, I think, 11 or 12 amendments to CPA over the 20 years. And one of the early ones that we advocated for was to expand that list of items to include documents and artifacts. So they now are eligible for CPA funding. But again, not everything to do with documents or artifacts. Certainly, if you find, you have documents from the 1700s that are moldy, like the town clerk in, I think that was Mendon or Grafton, is holding that green book. Certainly, that's something that could be restored with CPA funds. But we often get the question, and I think I can't remember exactly what Julie told me, whether this is a project that's coming up. But you folks someone asked about digitization. Do you have a digitization proposal in front of you?
Well, we just actually approved some funds to get, have somebody come up with a complete estimate of what it's going to take. And then so there'll be a second application for actually approving the whole project to move ahead.
Is it digitization?
Yes.
No,
Okay.
It's part of it. Part of it is.
Yes. Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's not, and that's not part of, what they're trying to do is they've got documentation that goes back to the 1700s. And they've hired only one company in the Commonwealth, we were told, does the proper job. And they're trying to see which documentation to save and how to save it.
Right. So if saving it means actual physical work to the documents, you're good to go. Deacidifying the paper. But the digitization is not eligible for funding.
It's not. It's saving and restoring the documentation is what it is.
Right.
There's some that they feel is either not needed or it's beyond saving it.
Right.
So there's a company that I forget where it's not an expensive process for right now. It's only $3,100 or $3,500, but they're going through the documentation in question to see if it can be saved and what should be saved.
Right. And so, they may recommend certain things, treatments for the documents, and the state bid list does have more than one company on it that does that work. The New England Document Center in Andover does it. Browns
That's the
River
one
up
that's
in
doing
Bron-
it.
Yeah,
There
New
was
England
another
Document.
one that wasn't as extensive, Stuart. Or
Yep,
didn't meet the city clerk's needs.
Yeah, the New England Document Center is fabulous. And Erica, you're in Billerica. They restored the Great Deed of Billerica, which was like the 1600s deed from the Native Americans.
Wow.
And they painstakingly restored it. And we actually have a success story on our website all about that project. And you can see them up in Andover at the New England Document Center, painstakingly restoring
Wow.
that deed to the great, they call it the Great Deed of Billerica.
That's great.
To the extent, though, that it involves digitization, that part of it is not eligible because you're not doing anything to preserve the actual document. You're taking a picture of it. You're creating something new, really. You're creating a digital copy of it. And actually, this is the letter from DOR that talks about digitization. And I just noticed that it was actually to you back in 2008. I don't think any of you were on the committee back then. But this is the, and we can send this to Julie afterwards. Or Julie, did I send it to you already? I can't remember.
Not yet, no.
Okay. Yeah, I'll send it to you afterwards. I'm going to make a little list of follow-up documents here in case anyone has any other things they need. So I'll send you this letter. I'll send it back to you, actually.
Thank you.
I think we probably got it from you originally. But they talk about, how the work that Justin described, the actual preservation work is eligible, but the digitization part, the clerk should, request general fund money for that piece of it. And you can combine those two funding sources, in phase 2, and to do that. And then the other thing that we wanted to talk about a little bit, which has been an ongoing issue in Waltham, of course, is the issue of restrictions. Anytime you acquire something with CPA funds, it's very clear in Section 12A of the legislation that there needs to be a restriction put on that asset. And it needs to be a permanent restriction that protects that asset for the category for which it was purchased forever. So if you buy a piece of open space, a farm, it has to have either an agricultural preservation restriction on it or a conservation restriction. You buy a historic building, has to have a historic preservation restriction on it. You create affordable housing or buy an apartment building that's turned into affordable housing, has to have housing restrictions on it. And those restrictions have to be approved by the state agency in charge of that category. So if you're writing a CR, you can put whatever you want in it, but it would be a waste of time because you're going to have to send that to the Secretary of Environment for his signature. And he's got a team of lawyers who look at it and they make the final decision about what goes in that document. You certainly have some control and can negotiate with them, but by and large, if it's a perpetual restriction, it needs the approval of the secretary for that agency. Same thing with a historic restriction. They're even tougher at Mass Historic. Before Bronna Simon, the head of Mass Historic, will sign it. That's a very involved process. APR restrictions go to the Secretary of Agriculture, Undersecretary of Agriculture, who has to sign those. And there's a point person at each of these state agencies that towns work with to craft that restriction. So your legal department would work with the legal department at EEA, for example, to do the open space restriction. The other piece that people kind of misunderstand is that the restriction is actually a piece of ownership in the property. It's a 17-page document that's filed at the registry, and it's actually a legal property interest. And the same party can't own the property and the restriction. Those are both real property interests, and they have to be held by separate parties. Because if the city owns the land and a land trust, for example, holds the restriction, their job is to watch over what the city does. So 50 years from now, when people have forgotten it had a CR on it, was bought by CPA money, and they propose doing something with that parcel that's not in keeping with open space, the land trust is monitoring that, and they catch that. So the city is not going to monitor itself, obviously. So if the city owns the land, a third party has to own the restriction. It can work the opposite. The land trust can buy and own the land, and then the city can hold the restriction, and they'll be watching over what the land trust does on the property. So those are the components of a restriction, and particularly for open space, that's the most common restrictions that we see. There's been close to 900 parcels purchased with CPA funds. And that requirement comes from, I said, Section 12A. And what EEA will tell you is that if you haven't done the restrictions on these parcels, you technically have a flawed title. You have not complied with the rules of the funding source you used. If you use CPA funds, there's a law. Chapter 44B, Section 12A says you have to put a restriction on it. And if you use CPA money and don't do it, you actually have a flawed title. You have not fulfilled the requirements of the funding source you used. So, we looked at some of the land that's in the CPA database. I don't know if some of these do have restrictions on it, some of them don't, but it's definitely something that the CPC should start working on if you haven't already. A lot of times these restrictions don't happen because no one takes ownership of them. But it really is the CPC. You're the ones that recommended these projects. You're the ones that put your stamp of approval on them. And to follow it through to make sure that the restrictions are done really should be one of the tasks of the CPC and the energy behind it. Of course, the legal department's going to do all the work and the drafting. They're going to be talking to the state. But I know in my town, for example, when I was head of the CPC, when we sat around and worked on the terms of the CR, it was our lawyer, someone from the selectmen, and someone from the CPC, someone from the conscom, and we all worked together. And then we handed that off to the state for their approval. So the CPC usually has a seat at the table in making sure these are done.
Well, let's start off, there's no table, okay? And there's no seat to be had, okay? We've tried, Diana tried, I've tried. The law department is a little bit delayed, let's put it that way.
Yep. So one of the things you can do, Justin, is if you can get approval for this, is what I would suggest is that you send an appropriation to the council. The CPC can recommend its own projects, or if you have enough money in your administrative account, and hire an attorney who specializes in these restrictions.
That's not, the problem is not that. We could do that, but it still has to go through our law department.
Yes, when that attorney is done, your law department has to approve it.
That does not agree with the alternate contract.
Right. So, a lot of times
I'm being nice about this.
Yes, absolutely. Although it's been a decade and a half, and there is a point at which you maybe don't have to be nice about it, because it is a violation of the law. And so you're already ineligible for any grants to come from EEA. They will not give you a land or a park grant. Every time you apply for a land or a park grant or all of these other environmental grants, it's right in their application. They will look through and determine if you have any CRs that have not been done. And they will not give you that grant until you complete those CRs. So you're actually, hurting yourself in the competition for other state grants by not having this done. So the state is starting to really crack down on this because they've given communities, these things do take time. You're not the only community that has a difficult law department. By nature, that's what the law departments are there for. They have to really make sure that these things are done properly, and that does take time. But not a decade and a half. And so the state gave people time, and now they're starting to really, turn up the heat a little bit. The Fernald is going to be difficult. It's a big property. There's a lot going on there. But it would be great to start on some of the easier ones that should be done. It's going to take some bird dogging to get that done. And hopefully some in-person meetings, and potentially.
Excuse me a second, Stuart.
Yeah.
Bill, do you have your hand up first?
Yeah, I do. And I was just waiting for a good chance to jump in there. And
Go ahead. I agree with you, Stuart, but I'd like the committee to ask Bill Doyle first and then Dan Melnichek.
Okay, so Justin, I understand that the law department has its reservations, and they're looking and doing their job, and that's great. But and correct me if I'm wrong, and people that have more history than me can maybe help out here. One of the things I understand that's a point of contention in Waltham is, so the city holds the property, but what entity have we found to hold the conservation restriction? My understanding is that we're having a difficulty finding that entity. Like Waltham Land Trust jumps to my mind as the perfect entity, but they don't feel they're, and I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouth, but robust enough to take care of what it means to defend a conservation restriction. So that's kind of like, is that one of the things that's at play? And then my question for Stuart maybe is what type of funds can we get from, and I forget the matrix that you had there, the support funds to help a smaller entity like Waltham Land Trust grow to be something
that comes out of administration. We have the administrative funds. That's not a problem. Dan can answer the land trust. Land trust could take some of our properties, but Dan, will you answer that, Bill, please?
Yeah, and maybe Stuart, if you help us out with understanding this.
On the history aspect, Bill, basically has been many years now, two properties on the list, and it's so long I can't remember which ones, that there were CRs written by a professional lawyer in the biz.
Yep.
And submitted to the law department. The law department pulled out a bunch of important sections.
Correct.
Sent it to the state. The state said, no, you have to put all this back in, and has come back. And then basically, depending on who you talk to, nothing's happened, or maybe something happened, but nothing really.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the history on those guys.
Two properties, right. So
on those two properties, but with a property like the Fernald, how can we get an entity like the Land Trust?
The Land Trust can't do it.
Assuming we can get over these things and finally get like good documents, like is there a reservation that the Land Trust feels that they aren't as robust enough? And can we overcome that with CPA funds?
I'm on,
like, let's answer that one, Dan.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So what I would recommend, the Fernald is going to be very difficult, but there's not a culture in Waltham of doing these things. So I'd set the Fernald aside for now, and I'd go focus on the easier, smaller ones. There has to be a culture of adhering to the law. And the city has to get used to that. And they're going to have to get comfortable with being told by the state what can and can't be in that document, because that's just the way it is. And when you adopted CPA, the citizens approved that entire law. They adopted all 17 pages of CPA, including section 12A. So the citizens told the city officials, we're accepting this law. We expect, you to comply with the law. And section 12A is pretty clear. And they're going to have to live with the language that the state gives them. There is some negotiation back and forth. The state is not inflexible. They're actually become a lot more flexible, frankly, from what I've seen. They've become a lot easier to deal with for open space restrictions, actually. They've learned a lot. And there's a new person involved too, as well, because the person who was there left in November. So I would take a couple of the small ones. I think.
Who is that new person?
I don't know the new person.
Okay, all right, fine.
But John Gioia left in November, and I don't know who they hired to replace John. But you folks can also work on this without the law department. You can't get it finally approved, but someone could certainly call the state and review those paragraphs with them and say, hey, I'm going to set up a phone call. Will you talk to our law department about it? There's certainly a lot of work that can be done, to help the law department and get them into a place where they can approve it. Bill, you also asked about how do you help a land trust hold one of these? Yeah. We actually heard loud and clear that a lot of land trusts are challenged in holding these. And they usually want an endowment, a one-time payment of funds, so they can put that aside in case they ever do need to have an action, which is very rare. It also helps them pay for yearly monitoring, to go walk the site or get a specialist in there to determine, what is it that was found on the site, et cetera. And we worked hard at the legislature to amend the law that you can now use CPA funds to pay the nonprofit to hold the restriction. You can't pay them annually, but you give them a pot of money, $15,000, $20,000, whatever it is. If it's a really complicated parcel that's, surrounded by houses, which has potential for encroachment, that might be a little bit more money because that's a lot more work for the land trust. But you now have CPA funds that you can use for that. That change was made quite a while ago, actually, I think 2012.
And I believe the two CRs that were written included terminology for funding. Yeah.
It did, absolutely. I should say they did.
Yeah.
And we not to beat this, but maybe after we're finished with Stuart, we could maybe hire Diana, pay Diana to write the CRs on the two we will hold off on is UMass and Fernal, because those are enormous, but we should at least start on the others. But
well, it sounds
the questions. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, no, Justin, it sounds like we already have two that are there that are probably in pretty good shape. We just really need to initiate that negotiation discussion.
No.
Well, I mean, the state's saying these words have to be in there, and the city is saying we don't want it there.
Yeah, right.
But the state wins that battle.
Well, again, we're going to have to start fresh. This goes back probably, I'm going to guess, 7 or 8 years, maybe longer.
The state hasn't really changed the template they use. I'm sure those CRs are going to be darn close to.
I think Diane has got at least 2 written.
Yeah.
So I'll contact her, but I don't want to spend a lot of. I don't want the meeting to go much over an hour, Stuart. I guess that's the other.
Right.
And I want to get as much in as I can.
Sure. So let us know if you need help on this issue. We have, experts we can put you in touch with. But it is something that I did want to bring to your attention. Julie and I had talked about it, and it is important for your CPA program. And last thing I'll say on this, Justin, you said, you have to be nice, which you do, of course, you always want to be nice, but there have been CPCs that have had difficulty getting this done, and you have the control to stop the future revenue stream from going to the city council until this is done. You have their ultimate control. And there are some CPCs that said, we're not taking any more applications until we clean up 20 years worth of undone things, which is not an unreasonable position to take. And so,
Stuart, and I've brought up that as an option, and I'm starting to feel like a time to bring that up again.
Right. But that's something your CPC has to debate at another time and consider that, but it has been done clearly. So the last thing I have for you tonight was actually the first thing that we talked about. We said, maybe it's time to get together, is the process you folks use to approve your CPA projects. And every community has different processes. That's one of the great things about CPA. It says nothing about the application process. It's all up to each community. So there are probably 188 different application processes. But I don't know of anyone that does it like you folks. So I just wanted to open your eyes a little bit to a possible change to that. Honestly, we don't have a stake in this horse at all. We don't really, prefer one source or the other. But when I heard about the fact that you have sort of a rolling process, I thought maybe that I could point out a couple of things that would help with that. What we see when communities have a process like that, because Northampton used to do it and they stopped, and there were a few others as well. When you have 8 different application cycles, basically there are 8 full application cycles every year for your CPC, it becomes sort of a first come, first serve, grab the money type of approach. And what happens if at the first meeting of the year, a big project comes in and it's not a great project, but it's okay, and it gets approved and it's grabbed most of the money? You have limited resources, right? You only have a certain pot of money to spend. And then a phenomenal project walks in 3 months later, but you don't have enough money. And so that's why almost every CPC takes all their applications in at one time, either one cycle or 2 cycles a year. And then they can look at the big picture of how much money they have, what the priorities of the community are, and which applications match those priorities. You can't prioritize anything if you're taking in applications 8 different meetings in a row. You can't do priorities. You're now just reacting to individual proposals and looking at them, and it becomes more of a rubber stamp process. We have the money, it's legal, let's do it. There can be no applying your CPA plan. There can be no long-term planning. There can be no prioritization because you're taking them in one at a time. The other thing is, when you have 8 opportunities for someone to launch in an application, is you get some things that are not really ready for prime time. If you have a couple of deadlines a year, then people really have to work, because if they miss that deadline, it's a long time before the next one. So that you tend to get much better applications. You get applications that are much more complete. You get better applications, and you have left yourself time to do due diligence. I think, everyone would love to have the Fernald process back. There were a lot of mistakes made in that process, and they were honest mistakes because it happened at a very accelerated timetable. But by having a process where you have 1 or 2 cycles a year and you leave 3 months or so or more between the application coming in and your vote, you now have time to really get that project into good shape and really think about it and explore all the issues of that project. And it results in a much better project at the end of the process and a much smoother process. So that's just some thoughts, as to why, almost every community in the state uses 1 or 2 rounds a year, as opposed to, 8 rounds a year. The last thing I'll say is that's a lot of work. You're taking in applications, copying them, posting a public hearing, having a meeting, 8 times. You're going through 8 cycles a year, which is a ton of work. And you're still, taking in a new application at this meeting while you're still figuring out what to do with the old one. So they get to overlap. So, and at some point, the money will get tighter, and you'll have just that year's money. And then what are you going to do? Take applications until the money runs out. So it's just something to consider. Honestly, it's totally up to you folks. And there's nothing at all illegal or wrong about the process you use. And if it's worked for you, keep it going. But I just wanted to give some perspective. I was surprised when I heard it, because I have not seen a community do it that way since the ones that tried it early on and changed their process. But it is really totally up to you, and every community is different. And perhaps that works for Waltham, which is great. I just wanted to present some thoughts on it as to why you might want to possibly have a discussion on it. Probably now is not the time because you're in the middle of the cycle, but at the end of this process, before you jump into it next year, it'd be worth having an agenda item and having a discussion about it as to whether it's something you want to try something different. And that's all I had for you tonight, Justin, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Julie's got a question Julie?
Yeah, so do other communities have fewer meetings? Like, do they only
No,
meet
they have more.
twice
They have
a
more
year?
meetings. They have more meetings.
Really?
Most
Okay.
communities, most CPCs meet year round. Once a month is the standard. Some meet once a month, but then getting in the approval process before town meeting, they often meet twice a month. And they really dig into the due diligence. That's what they spend most of these meetings doing, is discussing these projects and sending lists of questions back to the applicant and basically getting them in good shape, and working with the city officials to determine what's the money that's available for funding, and kind of creating a jigsaw of, where we're going to do the different projects and which accounts we're going to take them from, to get ready for presenting them to the council.
Okay, thank you.
So Stuart, just some clarity on that. More meetings in between, but public hearings where the applicant actually comes in and presents are twice or 3 times a year.
Correct. And actually, you do those as public hearings. They are not required to be public hearings. So a public hearing is where you have to post it 2 weeks ahead of time in a newspaper, which costs money and is a little bit of work. And you have to let everyone who wants to talk. A public meeting you guys are meeting among yourselves. You can allow other people to talk if you want. You can invite people in, etc. But a public hearing is only required in CPA once a year. And it's the hearing at the beginning of the process where you take input from the public on what are the priorities the CPC should be looking at for that year's funding. I mean, that's kind of why everyone does it on a once a year cycle, is because the legislation says you write a plan, you update the plan every year, and you kick off that process with a public hearing to get input from the public. And then that kicks off your process. So now some ideas from the public on things that are important, and you can reflect on those as the project applications come in. So you have 8 public hearings a year. You're not at all required to have more than one, and you're not required at all to have a public hearing on the projects. It's input at the beginning of the process. That's the required public hearing. There's nothing wrong with having a public hearing on the projects. I kind of like that idea because you're giving the public an opportunity to comment on the projects. And there are some CPCs that have 2 hearings, one at the beginning for input on the priorities, and then they do one right before they make their recommendation votes, when they have all the projects presented, and people can ask questions on all of them, and then they vote at the next meeting or something like that.
So, Stuart, do you know if there's any communities or do you have any kind of boilerplates or any kind of outlines of how other communities do it, like cities like our size? Or we just have to do a little research and figure that out on our own?
Yeah, unfortunately, communities aren't the best about sharing their local procedures with us. It's one of our weak points, is that we don't have the local documents of all 188 communities because no one thinks to send them to us, and we're a pretty small staff to be able to gather that things. But the good news is that on our website, on the individual communities page, we have links to the CPC page on every community's website, and usually the application is right there. So if you go to the individual communities tab, it'll say CPC website, you click on it, and now you're right on the CPC page for every community in the state. Boston, for example, has 1 or sometimes 2 rounds a year. Northampton has dropped back to 1. They started out with 4. The vast majority have.
I think to the point, and one more thing, Dan, on this, and I'll be quiet. I think to your point, Stuart, we historically have had a huge war chest of money, not war chest, what do you want to call it? Just piles of money in the CPC. And I always figured that when that went down and we had to start to pick and choose, because we could just pay everything. And when that went down and we had to start picking and choosing is when the rubber was going to meet the road. And I think we're there now. We're getting close to that with a couple of big acquisitions, Fernald and the UMass property and stuff. So us as the commission here, we're going to have to, sharpen our pencils and come up with I think a better process, because the days of just approving everybody that came in or just blanket, but rubber stamping everybody. I think that's coming to an end as we start to get a little more nimble with the cash reserves.
And that was one of my points is, if you are, most communities are limited to the money they have for that year. And if they did it the way you're doing it now, it would clearly be a first come, first served process. And you're going to be in the position of approving mediocre projects and having to reject really great ones by doing it.
Well, we hadn't given away, historically hadn't given away money in a long time. And we just had this, just kept piling up. So It was easy just to kind of approve everything. But that was a while ago, and now we're where we are. But okay, I'll be quiet now. Sorry, Dan. I know you.
No, please. All this is very interesting. But back to Northampton, is there? Like you said, they went to 1 or 2. One. They went to 1 from 4. Is there anything particular there? Do you remember them saying why or how that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the due diligence on these projects. If you're going to do it right, it can take some time. And they found that before they had even really got a handle on the projects that had come in, they were on to the next round of projects. And so things kept overlapping and backing up. And they quickly realized, oh my gosh, this is not going to work. And the legislation, like I said, has nothing about applications. It doesn't even say you have to take applications. Everyone does, but it starts at the process where it says the CPC shall make recommendations. As a matter of fact, I think the legislature might have been thinking of CPA as a program where the CPA committee would have a hearing, they would study the needs, they'd put together a plan, and the CPC would make a slate of recommendations. I don't even think the legislature was thinking of CPA as what it has become, which is an application process.
Mhm.
If you read the legislation and you see that those three things I just talked about, and then it doesn't say anything about applications. It says the recommendations of the CPC shall go to the council. I was thinking about it and I was like, I don't know if they ever really anticipated, CPA running this way, but it has become this type of program and it works really well.
Right.
But it is different in every community and you have to kind of find your own way. The last thing I'll say about the, I lost my train of thought. Sorry. It's gone. It was something about that I wanted to mention the bill, but it's gone.
All right, any questions of Stuart, anything he's spoken about tonight? You didn't remember but it was Stuart, right?
I did not, unfortunately.
All right, I want to thank you very, very much for taking the time out to help us out and explain and give your ideas. I certainly appreciate it. I know the committee does. So
Happy to
thank you for the help you've given us.
No problem. We're here for you guys. We're very excited. We went through a hell of a recount when Waltham adopted CPA. I don't know if Dan was around, but it was very, very close. And we worked
7
really
votes.
hard to make sure that Waltham would have CPA. And if you look back on it, boy, wasn't it worth it, right? Look at all the things you've done with this money, and it passed by 7 votes. So, we're really, really excited about you guys having CPA because it almost didn't happen. So kudos to you and let us know if we can help you ever.
Well,
Absolutely.
You have been, and thank you.
Hey,
Problem.
Julie and Justin, does it make sense to get this presentation and put it on our website? Is that something, Stuart? you're
Yes,
cool
let
with
me
us
add
grabbing
that to my list of things that I'm going to send you is the presentation. I actually am. I have to do that. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Superb. Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you,
No
Stuart.
problem. Have a good
Thanks.
meeting.
You too.
Thank you.
Okay, just speaking about meetings, the next one is May 10th. That's our annual input. Well, I had mentioned that last meeting. I wanted to see if the committee wanted to meet in person or on Zoom. What is your pleasure? Dan, I'll start with you first, Dan.
First, there's all the charts are showing an uptick in COVID rates going up. The BA2 is taking its toll, it looks like. Personally,
So you're on Zoom.
I would prefer Zoom
Okay.
still.
Okay, Erica.
Zoom is easier, but I'm open if there's a majority of folks who want to meet in person. But the Zoom, I would vote for Zoom as long as we can.
Amanda, and we can do Zoom right through June.
Yeah.
July is the first. The governor has said July is you got to go in person. Amanda,
Really.
I prefer Zoom as well.
then I guess that okay. Loretta,
Zoom's fine with me. Either way works.
Bill.
Zoom.
All right, so it's Sean.
Too convenient.
Okay, and Bobby.
I've asked him to unmute, but
Okay, he's muted. It doesn't. It passed. Zoom. Zoom. It is.
okay.
So Julie, when you make the, we're gonna have to publish that in the Globe. Would you make sure everybody knows because the News Tribune's not around anymore, so we have.
It is until May 5th. We just we'll make it in the paper this year.
Oh, well,
This is
good.
it.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, that is handled. Let's see.
And Julie, I'll set that up early so you have the link. Everything's ready.
Perfect. Great,
We
thanks.
will on the June meeting, we will
Oh, wait,
talk
what's
about
I'm sorry. What was the date again? It's May 5th.
10.
The 10th.
May
Yes,
10th.
thank you.
The last Tribune is the 5th.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, okay.
We're all set there. Excellent. Thank you, Julie.
Mhm.
The old business, just is, Bill, I'm gonna kind of shock you. We have 4,582,000 available, just to let
Yeah.
you know. So.
Yeah,
it's not-
when back in the day, we were in like 30 million.
No. The highest we had was like 21 and change. However,
Yeah.
the mayor.
Big number.
$14 million purchase. However, we were concerned we wouldn't have a million. We're at 4,582,293, and then we get the distribution October and November. So we should be in good shape, just to let everybody know.
Yeah, I think that 4 million number, that's pretty consistent for a community of our size. 21 million that's
Of
5
course, it was
times what
very
we
high.
have.
There's no question at all. But
And it was
the other
easy
thing
to
is-
just say, yeah.
Bob LeBlanc, do you have something? Nope. Okay.
No, I'm good.
So I wanted to bring you up to speed on the money, and then we can talk about Stuart's suggestion if you want, depending upon what the next meeting looks like. I try to keep these meetings no longer than an hour. We've gone over, and I apologize. But anyway, if any suggestions, comments, or questions?
Are you talking
Well, I
about
think it's worth,
Erica,
are you talking about the idea of changing the format, the application format?
correct.
Yeah, we can talk about it more. I don't think we should change it for this year. Maybe it's something we talk about at the public hearing.
Well, that's what
Yeah.
yeah.
and after the public hearing,
Right,
we don't
right,
need
right.
the public opining on that. This is going to be
Well-
difficult enough with us.
I would say we should let them know, that this may be
Once we
coming.
make the decision,
Yes.
once we make the decision, we would let them know.
Yeah.
You don't want them mixing our timetable, if you know what I mean, all right?
Yeah.
So-
Okay, Dan,
What about, I think in the public input meeting hearing, the 1 a year thing next month, that we should bring up the issue of this conservation restrictions, the CRs, and let people know that, Waltham's in violation of CPA law, and that perhaps they want to talk to their legislators in the city council. And
Well,
I'm saying, I think
I understand, but not, let me see what I can do first. And if I don't, all of a sudden, this thing could blow up in the news. It's a messy thing. And it's something, I want to speak to Diana, see if she'll do the CRs. We can pay her for that. Okay. And we can have her present the CRs to the state, let the state send it back to us. And then we present it, the signatures, to the law department and the mayor. How's that?
Yeah.
I have a concern though. Is Diane on the land banks or on a committee that's going to hold the CR? Because then that's not a good thing either.
She is on the board of directors of the Waltham Land Trust.
Hmm.
But let
me ask
she's-
Loretta.
they're unpaid board. So there's no,
She's got no fiduciary benefit on this thing. So,
right.
and she knows, she
No,
knows,
she is the
what to do.
expert. She is the expert. I
and that's
agree.
the thing. Our law department is not.
Not, yeah.
And they've become a hindrance. And
Mhm, mhm.
and again, if that's what I'd like to do, and I'll ask for everybody's support on this thing. I will get in touch with Diana, see if she'll do a couple of CRs, send them directly in, and maybe even contact Stuart for a contact at the whatever. There's 3 different contact people with historical and open space and con rec and housing. I think housing we're all set on.
Well,
so Dan, I think you maybe we're trying to get to this point. So, okay, we do this and it still gets stymied and it still gets hung up in the law department. I think I heard Stuart say our recourse is, hey, you know that UMass property money you want? No, can't have it. You know that new park you want to use CPC money with? No, you can't have it. And it sounded like what Stuart said is we can do that. We've got the power to tell the city no.
We could possibly send a letter to the mayor telling her, because sending it to the law department.
Oh, no, I get that. I mean, someone's going to come in with an application and it's not going to be the law department.
Well, she's got.
The mayor's going to come in, Parks and Rec is going to come in.
She's got to present it.
But I would say, I mean, this is like the nuclear option, but when Parks and Rec even submits an application, we don't even look at it. Not going to give you any money on that.
Well,
can't. We're in violation of the law.
You got to give them a heads up.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you give them a heads up, but
So
we send around a letter and say, don't bother applying until these are
No,
done.
The letter's got to go to the mayor, because the mayor signs off on any city acquisition.
Yeah, exactly, the mayor.
So, let me think. I'll put together something with Julie. I may contact Erica.
Mention that.
Pardon?
I would mention that because I mean, some people on the commission, may be okay with it, but it's how many member board we have? Majority vote could say no, and we don't, and we start denying projects.
Yeah, Bill, I'm not saying no, but you gotta give a heads up first.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That's what give the mayor this heads up.
What?
Yeah.
I'm saying give the mayor this heads up, but it's not like it's a just-in decision. It's a voting board. So it's like, this could go any way, anytime.
No. What I would like to do is put together a letter, have the board take a look at it, of the committee, and then send it to the mayor, and then it's the ball's in her court.
Yeah, I 100%
doesn't move.
I 100% agree with that. But the next time something comes in, whether anyone was notified or not, or whatever, if a majority says no, and we vote something down,
I would be very, very much against that.
But that's the vote. It's the majority vote. I know, I get it. I would be against it too, but
I understand
that's the
risk.
risk.
I don't think it would be in the committee's best interest to do that.
Nope.
I'm just letting everybody know my sentiments on it. Okay.
And I agree, but in your discussion with the mayor, you should let her know that that's the risk. Any vote of the committee could say no for that reason. And it may not be a majority, it may not be the smartest thing to do, but that could happen. That is one of the risks. And Stuart said basically tonight that that's something we could do. Yeah, I think it's worth telling the mayor that that's a risk at the time of an application.
Okay.
Just a heads up, I'm not trying to be. Yeah.
So as far as process on this letter, you're gonna, Justin, you're gonna write a letter. Oh boy, I'm very tired. Excuse me.
Justin, if you want to draft something, or I'm happy to review it. I think I know what you're saying. I think I know what you're getting at.
But but then let's circle it around just to make sure.
Yep.
That'd be great.
Yep.
Oh, I would not send it without the committee seeing it.
Yep.
That's not.
That's what I thought.
I agree. It's a committee decision, but I would like to think this thing out completely before we end up alienating everybody in the city. So anyway, anything else? Okay.
No.
That being said, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Second.
All right. Thank you very much.
You get to pick, Dan.
Bob's there. Okay. I want to thank you all for your time and your effort and your help. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
All right,
you.
y'all. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Bye.
Right.
Bye.